Over the past few years, we've seen the renaissance of the email as publishers and brands have rediscovered the benefits of that direct relationship with audiences. The power of the email can be seen from the sky-high valuations of newsletter platforms, in addition to the amount of time that is being spent iterating on existing email strategies. But at the same time, the format has yet to truly deliver on its promise. So a lack of investment in and understanding of the technology that underpins the more sophisticated strategies still holds it back. So to discuss the realities of email, particularly around the thorny issues of monetizing inventory while protecting user data, I'm joined by a panel of absolute experts who I'm delighted to introduce now. So please give a hand to Andreas Jürgens, who is the CEO and co-founder of Passendo, Anders Rasmussen, who's CCO and co-founder of Passendo, and Michael Ring, who's VP of Digital Strategy at Access Intel. Thank you all so much for joining me to have this chat.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Andreas, I wondered if you could maybe give us a quick introduction to why innovation around in-email advertising has stalled over the years, particularly given that there has been so much focus on it over the past couple of years, months, even decades.
Absolutely. Email is basically one of the oldest pillars of the internet. And as the web and normal advertising on the web has developed, in a lot of fronts, email have been standing still. And the technical challenge for doing intelligent ad serving in email is just different. When you have a normal ad server that works on web like we all used to, you're very dependent on cookies and you're very dependent on JavaScript. And most of the big platforms out there providing ad serving are highly dependent on these and cannot really work in environments where these are not present. And what you need to do to be able to do this efficiently in email is to solve these challenges in a different way. How do you identify the users without cookies? How do you provide intelligence in the medium inside the page or the email you're looking at without JavaScript? This is something that is now really important if you want to go and have a good strategy for how to commercialize, that you have tools that can actually do these things. So you have the control and transparency that you need to have a decent strategy as a publisher. So why this haven't developed is a good question. I think one of the reasons could be that email normally for a traditional publisher might encounter anything from 5 to 10% of their total inventory. But this is also typically inventory that could be put on top of what they already have, incremental revenue. So this not being addressed is now becoming an issue for many, many larger media organizations that they need to address this to absolutely maximize what they can get out of the different channels they own.
See, I think that's really interesting. The fact as well that, you spoke there about it being additive. It's still seen as a kind of a nice to have rather than a must have. So, Mike, what is that underlying reason why people still see it as a bit additive and not something that they should be putting a lot of resources into?
It's a great question. And funny enough, it's something that we at Access Intelligence are trying to change our perspective, especially with our clients now as we talk, because, it was something that I think kind of fell by the wayside in the past. There's a lot of added value, a lot of make goods, hey, let me throw you into a newsletter. It was never really at the forefront of the product. But as things change, right, as there's Apple privacy, as there are other privacy issues or ad blockers, I think what we're doing now in the industry is we're seeing the email itself move to the forefront. You've got a limited amount of inventory and you've got an engaged audience. So it's an opportunity to really bring value both to your audience and to your advertisers. So it was something that fell by the wayside, and that's why it wasn't additive. But I do think, not just us and Access Intel, but I do think the industry itself is seeing that product, that piece of the puzzle really become something that is much more the forefront of what the product set is and not so much the additive.
And I think we can see kind of the tangible benefits of that from the sheer amount of money that places like, Substack Review, kind of they're investing in that direct relationship. So Anders, to what extent then is the industry waking up to the value of this engaged audience via email again? And has it been something that you think has been neglected, particularly over the past couple of years?
I just reminded myself just before our talk here that we actually been looking a little bit into how old email is as a channel, and we're looking at it. It actually started before the internet was invented, which is back in the 70s, which is actually pretty interesting. And then if you look at the whole story, I'm not gonna go through all this sort of the decades here, but it's an interesting journey from where it was invented by, I think, some military project back in the 70s to then in the 80s, when the internet was invented. When in the 90s, when everybody just started having an email, and it suddenly started become the internet's key to digital life. And then from going there into a decade, where spam suddenly became an issue, everybody was just sending email blasts everywhere. And then actually how this whole privacy issue suddenly, became a challenge again. And now we're back to where we actually began, or almost began, where email is sort of coming a little bit back to becoming, the key to digital life, which I think is pretty interesting. So I think to answer also maybe your question a little more is that I think there's a lot of answers to that. I think one of them is that it ties pretty much into that whole discussion that I know that companies like Mike and Access until they have today, about building this whole subscription strategy. And this is not just email; this is across both web and email. How to sort of maintain the users and the audience.
100%. And I mean, you've touched on so much there that I know we're going to get into over the course of the discussion. But one of the things you really mentioned is this kind of idea that as we've moved back towards a subscription economy, particularly around publishers, they are looking to reestablish those direct relationships and then monetize them in kind of more uninteresting ways. So at the moment, do we think that publishers particularly are getting everything they can from the emails they send?
Absolutely not. I think it's an underdeveloped area, and I think it's an area where the resurgence that's happening now is the resurgence for people who are on the forefront. And I think the main body of publishers are still seeing that they need to do something, but they lack I wouldn't say the ideas to do it, but maybe the tools. And it has to come from the understanding that this is commercially viable to do. It's something that, we could talk about the decline of the trust of normal display advertising on the web. People are saying, I see a banner here, I don't want to click it, I'm afraid where my user data goes. All of these things work different than email. Email is a trusted channel between a sender and a recipient. And when you have your email newsletter that you're waiting for every morning to see the latest business news or sport news or whatever you're seeing here, that's a trusted channel. And that channel, not to commercialize it in some way, is it doesn't work on the long term. As a publisher, you need to get paid for whatever you're building. I've been in ad tech for 25 years. We are trying to keep the internet free, and this works in the same way. If you need to keep this trusted channel free, you need some other way of commercializing it, and advertising is just a strong thing to go and do here, especially if you get the right tech, so you don't have data leakage and you have relevance being the top priorities for this. This would be my top priority. So I think there's a mass body of publishers who are now realizing that they need to go and do this, and they need to find the right strategy for actually doing this without interrupting the trusted channel that email is, and they're already recognizing that it is.
The big question that naturally follows then is, what is preventing publishers from doing this? What are some of those big impediments? You mentioned tools. Is that kind of a lack of awareness around what tools are available or of how to implement them? There's
a few things I want to unpack. One is, Anders, that's a pretty cool timeline that you just laid out before about email from like start to finish or where we are today. I thought that was awesome. That was pretty cool. I kind of geeked out on that a little bit. The other thing is to say what Andreas was talking about. I agree. As a publisher, as I've been in the publishing side for the majority of my career, we're not doing all we can with email. We can certainly do better. And yeah, it's a trusted source, but it's just an additional way to stay relevant with your audience, right? I think what they say, people have the attention span of a goldfish. So you really need to see something more than that one time to have it resonate, right? And so especially in the B2B industry, where the content you're reading relates directly to your job, your day in, day out job. It's something that you really rely on. And I think that's why our clients, our advertisers as a publisher, they come to us as a trusted source. So to look at email as being, again, back to the additive part, it's something that's so important to just the overall media mix that we need to be doing more. So I think that, with looking at privacy again, and looking at just how you can reach your audience and how much is out there, it's become so important to see how we can maximize our emails, how we can monetize them, how we can get better content, how we can get better audience interaction with it.
And I think now we're addressing a lot of sort of the traditional publishers. I think there's also a whole resurgence of publishers who are email first and who are basically building strategies around email, and then web becomes secondary or might not even exist in the mix for them. And these guys have seen the light in regards to this is the trusted channel of the future. Easy for me to say. I'm in the middle of email. I build email every day. But we really think that this is, the emergence of something new and strong. And the publishers who are out there who are realizing that, they will win that game. Eventually, the big guys might catch up, but it's going to take a time, and there's ample time for new guys who are creative and who want to work with formats to go and gain market share and gain a trusted audience for their communication.
So, Anderson, what are some of the kind of the current impediments to actually addressing this issue of not fully monetizing, not fully making the most of your emails? And is there anybody who you think is overcoming those impediments really well?
What I've seen that a lot of our most successful clients is that they have obviously used our tool to use it in the way that are somewhat similar to what they do on web, right? So build commercial products like you would do on web with your advertisers. So, for example, go out and say, hey, would you like to buy 1 million email ad impressions across all our newsletters that talk about, the salmon industry, for example. And by the way, I'd like to use a frequency capping of 10, and it should only be the people in Hamburg and Berlin area that should revisit that. That's something that would be a very, very normal standard way of, running an ad on the web. Now, this is something you can do with an email ad server, for example.
What with the focus on privacy being so great at the moment and users being slightly more aware of what is necessary around privacy, how are publishers protecting themselves, but not just themselves, but their audience as well in this kind of journey of in-email advertising?
I think it's something where a lot of them have seen the light on the web. They would not allow to have some foreign tag from some independent platform running without knowing exactly what data is being exposed, what data is being leaked. I think a lot of publishers right now might be commercializing their email, but they might be using some tools for doing that let data leak left and right. And you have to be conscious about that, because this is something that could ruin this trusted relationship you have with the end user. All of a sudden, you will see, I hope, the same focus on user privacy and trust of this channel that needs to become apparent also with the tool selection you have. If you just choose some random commercialization tag, you put it in your email, you receive a check every month, but you let the data leak and that becomes part of the product for the guys who are selling you the tag, that's not something that's compliant with the way we are thinking and with the whole European situation and the California situation, where you have laws now coming in place where you need to protect the user data. You need to make sure that if you're sharing the data, there's a good reason for it, and everything that can be anonymized should be anonymized. And you could say a lot of cookie practices are way over the limit to what you would say is all right. And then you have the whole identity graph game. People who are building identity graph, they might not use the cookie, but they're still trying to fingerprint everybody. For me, that's very borderline. Why do you do it? Who do you share the data with? For what reason? Does this really benefit the end user? For me, that's the main question here, to try to protect the end user and the privacy of the end user. And if the tool selection you have, do not take this into account, then you have the wrong tool selection. That's definitely how I would put it. And I think there's a lot more... People are a lot more focused on this on the web than they are on email, but I think it's coming for email as well. Otherwise, the whole trusted thing about this channel will slowly wither away.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, that takes me back to something I want to ask Mike, because Mike, before you were talking about that kind of direct relationship and the trust that's kind of built around that. But when you are trying to build out new potential, in-email advertising solutions, how sure can you be that you are going to be compliant? What's best practice for making sure that you are protecting kind of user privacy when you are developing these tools?
It's a great question. I think you have to start internally and say, all right, who are the right teams to bring in? Who are the right people to understand, your tech partners, your stack, and really trusting those partners themselves. I mean, a big thing for us is when we bring someone into our tech stack, they go through a rigorous process. We are assessing them. We are looking at industry standards. We're looking at how they themselves present themselves in the industry before we ever bring anyone into our tech stack. So I think really having a trusted technical platform is what's really important for us. And so when we work with our CDP or our ESP or working with anyone in those industries, you really need to sit down and understand where there could be data leakage and how you could protect your data. Because again, it goes back to your brand. It's not good for you and it's not good for your clients if you have your data leakage. So you really want to make sure you're not hurting anyone. So yeah, it's really just important to understand who you're including in that tech stack. And to kind of Andreas' point, you don't want to just throw a tag on your email. You want to make sure you're vetting your partners quite well.
Yeah, you've actually got to put the work in and can't just take that kind of easy solution out.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we've spoken about some of the potential downsides there of doing it wrong, but what are some of the benefits that are specific to in-email advertising? And how do we sort of communicate that to audiences who might not necessarily even be aware that it's possible now? So, Anders, what are some of those benefits to in-email advertising?
I think first of all, email is an engaging media. I think probably most people in the industry here they would probably not on that. So that means that usually when people they go in and they sign up to receive a newsletter about whatever pets, it's more or less sort of automatically targeted into people who's interested in pets, right? And if you sign up to receive that newsletter, it's on your behalf, right? So if you want to if you wanna read the content in there, it's usually also very sort of content heavy about that topic. It means it's not plastered in with blinking banners everywhere.
And you are aware of who they are, I suppose. More importantly, you know what they're into based on the fact that they are self-selected.
Exactly, and I think this is also probably part of an answer to why we see more and more publishers, starting building more and more newsletter verticals, within different topics, because they really see this very, very strong and engaged audience that really specifically sign up to just, read about the salmon industry.
So it's interesting that, because it sounds so complementary to what publishers are already doing. They are, reaching these audiences directly. That allows them to kind of sell to them, whether that be subscriptions, whether that be products. But at the same time, if you are aware of who they are, you can presumably be serving them more relevant advertising as well. So it's not necessarily an additive thing, as it is already complementary to a kind of revenue strategy.
I think it used to be that email was exactly as you mentioned. It was a secondary thing, and it was sometimes for a publisher a tool to make to reach more subscriptions. You send out free emails, and then people become aware of your brand and they trust it, and then slowly they subscribe to the media. That's not the case anymore. I think email is often becoming the main course, basically the entree, where it used to be the starter. And I think that's a really important development. As Anders mentioned, this is just a media where you have a strong singular focus, and people are basically looking forward to go and look at this email every morning or every week or every month, and they're highly engaged. And this works well for the content, it works well for the advertising, and it also works well for the publisher and the end user. So if you do this right, it's a strong, trusted win-win chain. And if you do it wrong, you'll get no value whatsoever. So like anything in life, you have to go and do it right. But the potential upsides are just huge here.
When you look back at print, right? Print magazine for these companies, it was all about the circulation. How did you sell to your advertisers? All about the circ. Well, all right, once we start to become a digital company, what's the next avenue? And so it was all about those subscribers. And so I think that's a very important fact, is that it was all about boosting the subscriptions. So you can almost show it as if it were the same thing as subscribers. Not that it's apples to apples, but that really has changed now. And it really is about delivering the right content to the right audience and making that a meaningful experience, because that's what makes that audience come back and want to be a continuation of your overall audience for the brand. So again, it goes back to being good for your audience, but also good for your advertisers. So I think that's a huge point you make, Andre.
I think it's also fascinating as well, the idea that you spoke about the email as being a destination in and of itself. It is a sort of trusted channel, but it's also one that people look forward to because it is digestible. It's sort of separate from the mania of the wider internet. So the fact that you can put ads in front of these people in a place that's conducive to kind of their good mood and it's relevant to them is something that's so powerful. And it's something that I know that a lot of our listeners is something that they're grappling with, is actually making sure that ads are relevant, contextual, and more importantly, enjoyable.
And let's be honest, it's like with any advertising. If you do it right, it becomes part of the content. It's become something where it's content recommendation, where you're basically helping people evaluating new products, new concepts, new services, and if you do it wrong, it stands out in a horrible way. So like every other advertising point, it's really, really important to get the contextuality right and to get the right message in front of the right eyes. If you do it right, it becomes part of a greater whole and it adds to the experience. So doing that right is just super, super important, and that's not easy to do. Let's be honest. It requires great depth, meaning that if you just have 2 or 3 ads running in rotation in your email newsletter, you'll have a horrible result. But if you have a depth of 20, 30 ads running with frequency controlled, with first party targeting, with a tighter control of the contextuality, you're going to get really, really good results. But that's a demanding task, and it's a task where it's actually a little bit different from the web, because on the web, we normally have this analogy that when you're doing advertising on the web, it's like putting a net into an ocean. You're fishing, and you can have the same message, and you'll have new fish coming by all the time. If you are actually running advertising in email, it's like fishing in a lake. You only have the same fish in the lake, so you need much more advanced strategy for actually putting in the right rod at the right time and having a lot deeper strategy for how to actually pull that off.
That's such a good analogy. I like that. I'm stealing that. I'm going to use that myself. I suppose the question then is, how are publishers at the moment, how are most publishers really monetizing their emails already? If I think back to the ones that I subscribe to, I typically see it through, sponsorship deals. People will deploy a code to say, if you want to go to one of our partners and use this code, then that actually benefits us. So how are most publishers really doing it already, I suppose?
obviously our side of Passendo side is that, we see that most of, so our clients are usually, bigger publishers that are sending, millions and millions and millions of emails. I think in our world, and no offense here, Mike, but this is what we usually maybe already today call a little bit sort of the old school publishers, where they would take, and this goes back, this goes maybe 10 or 20 years back when they started, sending the first newsletters, they would take the classical ad formats that they were using on web, and they would just copy that, the classical MPU banner or, the leaderboards, and they would just place that into the newsletters, and they would use that and then just, think, well, if it works on web, it also works in email. But if you look at the trends and the tendencies that's going on today with what, you then could call the new school newsletter publishers, I think they're actually challenging the format, are really trying to, and Andreas was also talking a little bit about that, and on building formats that are really, really, really integrated into email, and using the email as it is. And this is where all these new sponsorship format come in, where you have these, sponsored by in the top, and then you would own whatever 100 characters of text, further down that will explain more about the product. So I think we're seeing a lot of things happening in terms of formats there.
It's crazy when you put it like that, to think that publishers thought that kind of it was equivalent to the web to just kind of plonk an MPU down in the email. Imagine trying to sell that as a strategy now to somebody who was primarily using social and just kind of saying, well, we're just going to slap a banner right in the middle of your TikTok feed or whatever, and it just wouldn't work. And yet that was sort of the philosophy back then. So Mike, you were going to sort of follow up, I suppose, I think, on what Anders was saying.
I think Anders knocked it out of the park there. I mean, so I'm coming from the B2B side, and I think the first thing to point out is that B2B is generally behind, by some years from the B2C side. I've been on both sides of the industry, and you could definitely see the difference. However, we are catching up much faster than we used to. But yeah, I mean, when you look at sponsorship or even back to the banner ads, it was very easy to sell a package to a client and say, give us one banner and we'll run it everywhere. And that was easy for the clients. It was easy for us. But that also has changed with the strategy of, again, being more meaningful. So, I like to pat myself on the back and Access Intelligence, give us a plug here, but I like to think that we're trying to be at the forefront on the B2B side and really try to integrate new means to advertise with our clients in our newsletters. But yeah, I think, you look at the past to the future, and how it's being monetized now. It's sponsorships. It's what's easy. It's sponsorships. It's taking those banners. I think the difficult part is breaking out of what's easy, but still making it something that's going to be, a product that you can monetize for the future. And that is going back to your tech partners, seeing how they can allow you to evolve. But yeah, it's kind of been what it has been for a long time. And now we're in the middle of seeing that renaissance again.
So in terms of breaking out from the easy then, which I think is a fantastic phrase for this, what should publishers be doing more of? Andreas, what is something that is being left on the table at the moment?
The first thing is, if you don't have the right tech stack, you're going to show the same ad to every recipient of the newsletter, which is just a horrible, horrible practice. The more you have people using your newsletter, you'll build up an understanding of their preferences, of what they want to see, what they're interested in. If you don't have a tech stack that takes that into account and then show you an ad that's relevant for you, you're doing it wrong. And this even counts if you have deeply integrated, innovative formats. You need something that's able to do that. Also, on top of that, if you don't innovate on the formats like you guys just addressed, you're doing it horribly wrong as well. So those things need to be settled, and then you need to have the right products there. And when I say products, I mean something that's interesting for the advertisers. You need to have products that's engaging. You need to have something where you charge this in a manner that makes sense. This thing about saying you'll get my send out on Thursday, it's going to be $10,000, and I don't know how many people see it. I don't know how many people click it. You're not going to get a happy advertiser from that. So having relationships with lots of advertisers, or either directly or through partners that have contextually relevant stuff for your newsletter, engaging formats, and then have all your first party data in your platform being part of the algorithm that selects the right ad at the right time. That's where you need to be going.
100%. And I think, like you said, the example you gave there of just kind of saying, well, look, give us X amount of money and we'll deliver potentially on something at some point, maybe. It just seems like a completely retrograde way of looking at things.
So many publishers are parked exactly there today, unfortunately.
Well, I was just about to ask then, why do you think more publishers haven't made that move to automate in email advertising? Is it a lack of understanding? Is it kind of investment in time or cost? Is it that they think their current solutions are good enough? Because as we mentioned, the email renaissance is only just kind of getting underway in earnest. So do they think, well, do these publishers who are kind of a little bit behind the curve, do they think that what they have is fit for purpose, even though it might not necessarily be?
I think a lot of guys, this is sort of a yardstick of the agility of an organization. So if you're doing the right thing here, you probably work in an agile organization. And if you are sort of stuck in status quo and not really working with the formats, it's probably a lot more cumbersome to get anything done in that organization. That's just really, really zoomed out. We have guys coming onto our platform who have dreams and visions. They sign onto the platform. 3 years after, they're still running MPU format in the top without really doing anything about it. And they have limited success. And we try to help them. We try to educate them. We try to inspire them. But sometimes it's just hard to get things done in larger organizations. So I'm not saying that, sort of how agile an organization is the only thing that determines it, but our practice and our experience is that it has a good deal of influence on how successful you are with these things. And then you can say, we've been discussing for a long time, you guys have burning platforms and traditional media and print going away, and that created a lot of willingness to go and try stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think that willingness was not necessarily followed by the agility to go and build new products and invent new concepts, which is what you need to do.
See, I think what's really interesting about what you've just said is this idea that it's not necessarily incumbent on the smaller, more agile companies to do this as well. It is important, in fact, imperative that larger organizations actually take a look at what they're doing around in email advertising as well. So, off the back of that, then, what is holding the larger companies back? We've had a couple of guests on Media Voices before who say that it just takes a long time to get through layers of management, to get buy-in from people who don't necessarily understand what the tech is doing. So, how would you actually go about convincing people that this is something that can be done and done effectively and really, really well with potentially less of an outlay than they think?
Yeah, good question. I don't think anything comes easy. Obviously, by adding an email ad server, that would definitely help and give some of the answers on the way. No, I think also a little bit back to what Andreas was also talking about before. I think maybe a lot of publishers are maybe not, I wouldn't say missing the bigger picture, but I think it's just how do we move a lot of the money from print over to online subscriptions. I know a lot of publishing thought leaders. They really see email, for example, as a very, very efficient tool to actually generate paying subscribers and converting them from the email to become whatever paying subscribers, either or as just a subscriber on the email. But also on the website. And then what about, for the newsletter that's about whatever wine,
Yeah.
Why not, make a subscription about that, and then start converting, So I think there's a lot of opportunities. Obviously, you can always start somewhere and you can start simple. That's obviously the way to go forward usually. But yeah, I think there's tons of opportunities here.
You touched on something I wanted to bring up, which is how wide can we go with this? What sectors could be taking advantage of in-email advertising more than just kind of the straight news publishers? Is this something that could be done by, even the smaller organizations who are pushing out emails to pre-existing consumers?
I think there's a huge long tail that needs to be addressed of people who are doing things that are a little bit outside of the traditional publishing. There's a whole long tail of private clubs, organizations, nonprofits that should be exploiting this much, much more. And of course, there is another big player in the room we're not addressing now, which is called retail media. They have exactly the same challenge. And I think 2022 is going to be the year of retail media on many, many fronts. And we're trying to address that as well. And we see a lot of interest in that. People who are basically saying, how can we automate a lot of the process that used to be very, very hard and very, very cumbersome, where you have the same challenge of getting the right message into a newsletter based on every individual user. And that's what a lot of people are struggling to do today. And when it comes to the long tail, I think it's basically lacking solutions. Hopefully we'll get to the point where you can go to your ESP, you can go to your MailChimp or whatever platform you're using, and then you can drag a commercialization element in, and then you for your 500 subscribers might be able to generate $50 a month, which is not much, but if you're a private club, that can be free coffee for everybody, every member of the club. Yeah. So there's a huge long tail, and there's a few sectors that are also ripe for doing things here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's non-negligible revenue as well. If you are a smaller organization, it could make such a difference. Mike, earlier you mentioned that B2B was potentially a little bit behind the curve there. In terms of B2B publishing, what is preventing more investment in this area?
Everything that we're kind of touching on, it's an understanding. It is certainly layers of management. You have to have a staff who not only understands it, but who then can break it down and say, all right, how can we advance it? It's very easy, I think, for a smaller publisher as well to say, hey, this is working. Let's just, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Like that's the old saying. However, that it's easier to do that because you have less of a staff, you have less of an understanding. So I think working with people who can help you educate your teams and understand why this is a benefit, that's really, I think, a big benefit or a big issue as to why we haven't seen the movement so quickly. Also, as we were just kind of saying before, if it could be a canned solution, if it could be something very easy that could be implemented, I think you will see the market change much faster. There's a lot of moving pieces and it can make you want to pull your hair out. But if it's a canned solution and it's plug and play, I think you'll see the industry move much faster. That
actually leads neatly onto the next question, which is how do we all then see that publisher email sector developing? Is it going to be the development of those easier kind of canned tools, as you said, Mike? Or is it going to be that there is going to be one or two big players who kind of take the lead and really help steer this development?
That's a high question.
It's always hard asking people to predict the future.
What we see right now is a lot of sponsorship platforms popping up where people are trying to basically facilitate, to be the market maker between supply and demand in this market. That has a lot of relevance at this point. I think there's going to be a lot of consolidation. I don't think we are in the consolidation phase for that yet. I think it's still going to explode for at least a year or two, and then stuff is going to happen. It's going to be consolidation. And then maybe at one point, a big player is coming in and trying to consolidate as much as they can into a bigger player. And then you have, to be honest, we a lot of the time use the analogy that, we are trying to address a technology niche that's been underserved, but we're still following the trajectory that web advertising took for the last 20 years. And to be honest, how we see things now, a lot of the guys who are out there, we see that, to be honest, we think that they're 10, 15 years behind in what they're doing technology-wise. We are trying to only be 5 to 10 years outdated compared to what's out there else. And I think, the guys who can catch up to the web as fast as possible while preserving the privacy, which is the biggest challenge for web, they're going to be the winners. I would love to position us there, but, let's see how the world plays out. There's other players out there trying to address this, but I think our privacy and technology first approach is probably going to be the winning strategy. So, but yeah, it's hard to predict, especially in the future.
Yeah, but I mean, definitely considering the amount of effort that's been going on preserving user privacy, making sure that people are aware of the primacy of their own data and, where they can actually choose to deploy their data or not. One thing that I wanted to touch upon there is you mentioned that there might be an early mover advantage for kind of players who want to get in the space and really help define it in terms of the tech side. In terms of publishers, is there an early mover advantage in being one of the first organizations, consumer-facing organizations, who does in-email advertising really, really well and actually makes it a kind of enjoyable, viable experience for consumers?
You are going to get all the nice benefits of email before everybody else. And this means that you can evolve and develop faster than everybody else. And this means that you basically have a head start. And let's be honest, if you just have, 10 minutes of head start on everybody else, that advantage just becomes greater and greater. It becomes a snowball because you can innovate faster and you can learn faster. So I think, if you don't try to be spearheading this, you're doing it wrong. You need to be out there experimenting. You need to be experimenting with newsletter formats, with ad formats, with technology, with all of the things you need to be experimenting with. And then when you find out what works, keep innovating. If you don't do that, you're going to get left behind. So, you could say that, if you're static, you're slowly getting left behind. So just standing still and waiting for I don't know what is not going to get you anywhere. So I think there is a huge advantage, meaning that you're going to see the future before everybody else if you're out there on the forefront.
Yeah, I'd rather fail fast than be a late adopter.
You spoke there about being kind of early to market with this, but how do you measure the success of an in-email advertising campaign?
Excellent content.
Yeah.
Including ads. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think content is the key. Again, if it's whatever topic the newsletter is about, we talked about it a few times already. You just need to to maintain a healthy sort of audience and a list there, it just needs to be excellent at all times. And how do you measure that? The easy answer is open rates and churn rates on the audiences, and for the advertisers it's about engagement, whatever, clicks and conversion rates. And
if I had one metric, open rate. You just said it on us, and I can give you. We see thousands and thousands of newsletters in our platform, and if you are hovering at 30%, you're part of the middle good set of guys.
Yeah.
If you're above that, you're doing excellently. If you are less than 30%, you need to look at what you're doing. That's just to throw some stuff in there. So if you're looking for a single metric, then look at your open rate. 30% and above, you don't have to worry. The house is not on fire. If it's less than 30%, you're probably doing something wrong. And those trends needs to stay on track on the longer term. So, you cannot just, if you as a publisher have the right advertisers after 1 or 2 sendouts, but if you put down a strategy and you evaluate month for month and you see the open rate slowly move in one or the other direction, that's the final measure of the quality you're providing, because that means that people are really looking forward to your content. And if you have that situation, you're doing it right.
Mike, how does that compare to kind of B2B and B2C sectors? Is there something that's different between the two when it comes to email marketing in email advertising?
Content is king. As Anders said, look, when you look at all these subscriptions for TV networks, people subscribe to like all of them, and then like I never use any of these, so they start to cancel them out. And I think email is the same way. It's an oversaturated market, and you really want people to want to be invested and to receive your email, or they'll just opt out. So content is certainly king, and it allows you to, yes, I think looking at the metrics, opens and clicks, allows you to work with your team internally, like your content team, to say, hey, this is working or this isn't working, and how do we drive them back? So yeah, you have to look at the basic metrics to understand the bigger picture.
Nice, absolutely. And we're coming to the end of our discussion. I wondered if we could maybe wrap up by providing a 5-10 year view on to what extent email is going to be a bigger part of the media mix in the future. Do we expect that it's going to grow as kind of the tech develops alongside it? Do we think that the recognition now of that direct relationship is going to empower more publishers to invest? Do we think that it's going to become a bigger part of the revenue mix even? So to what extent do we think that email is not just here to stay as part of publishers' revenue strategies, but will grow over the next 5-10 years?
That's a heavy one.
I could quote you a bunch of statistics. There's many different sources, but if you combine them, then we're looking at about 300 billion emails every day.
That's a terrifying number.
It's 300 billion every day, and that includes everything. So there's a lot of unserious, there's a lot of status mails, there's a lot of your message was read, single line emails, but in general, there's also a lot of really, really high quality in there, and that's growing. And it's growing year for year, month and month, and it has been doing that since the 70s. I don't see that that's going to go away. So it's not a question about if email is going away or not, because it's not. It's a question about, are you joining the wave? Are you joining this as a medium? And if you're not, then email might not seem important to you. But if you were doing it right, it would be important to you.
Absolutely, yeah. The fact that that it's not delivering is proof that you're not doing it right, I suppose.
Just adding to that, with my freshest statistical numbers here, I read that 73% of millennials, they identify it as their preferred means of business communication.
Wow.
I believe that, absolutely, yeah. So it's not going away anytime soon, particularly around sort of the area of direct comms.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Sound like it, yeah, exactly.
So thank you so much for taking the time to have a conversation. It's something that we talk about all the time on Media Voices, is how publishers are using email, not just in terms of direct engagement with consumers, with readers, but as a revenue play as well. So it's been fascinating to hear those stats. It's been fascinating to hear your hopes, your optimism for the way that publishers can actually use email to really build up their businesses. But more importantly, thank you so much for coming on and just enlightening myself and the listeners about the realities of in-email advertising. It's something that I don't think gets enough attention.
This was great. Thanks for having us.
Of course. Well, as a very final question then, if people want to find out more about Passendo, where can they go?
If you do a quick Google search, you'll have lots of resources there. Just put in Passendo. We have a unique name. So go and Google it and see what pops up. There's going to be lots of interesting information, both across LinkedIn and all our other channels.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Andreas, Anders, and Mike. It's been a fantastic chat, and hopefully the listeners have got as much out of it as I have. Thank you again.
Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.